Chapter 5. Gold in the Grass. "Go, go!" said Jack. He threw his notebook into his pack. He pushed Annie toward the rope ladder. "Bye, Henry," she said. "Go," said Jack. He gave Annie another quick push. "Quit it," she said. But she started up the ladder. Jack scrambled after her. Jack and Annie tumbled into the treehouse. They were panting as they looked out the window at the dinosaur. It was standing on a hilltop, eating flowers off a tree. "Oh, man," whispered Jack. "We are in a long time ago." The dinosaur looked like a huge rhinoceros with 3 horns instead of 1. It had 2 long horns above its eyes, and another one grew out from its nose. It had a big shield-like thing behind its head. "Triceratops," said Jack. "Does he eat people?" whispered Annie. "I'll look it up." Jack grabbed the dinosaur book. He flipped through the pages. "There," said Jack, pointing to a picture of a Triceratops. He read the caption. The Triceratops lived in the late Cretaceous period. This plant-eating dinosaur weighed over 12,000 pounds. Jack slammed the book shut. "Just plants, no meat." "Good," said Annie. "Let's go see him up close." "Are you crazy?" said Jack. "Don't you want to take notes about him?" said Annie. "We're probably the first people in the whole world to ever see a real live Triceratops." Jack sighed. Annie was right. "Okay, let's go," he said. Jack shoved the dinosaur book into his pack. He slung his pack over his shoulder. Annie started down the ladder, and Jack followed her. "Just promise you won't pet him," Jack called down to Annie. "I promise," said Annie. "Promise you won't kiss him," said Jack. "I promise," said Annie. "Promise you won't talk to him." "I promise," said Annie. "Promise you won't—" "Don't worry," said Annie. Annie and Jack stepped off the ladder. The pteranodon gave them a friendly look. Annie blew him a kiss. "Be back soon, Henry," she called. "Shh," said Jack. And he led the way slowly and carefully through the ferns. When Jack and Annie reached the bottom of the hill, they knelt behind a bush. Annie started to speak, but Jack quickly put his finger to his lips. Then he and Annie peeked out at the Triceratops. The dinosaur was bigger than a truck. He was eating the flowers off a magnolia tree. Jack slipped his notebook out of his pack. He wrote, "Eats flowers." Annie nudged him. Jack ignored her. He studied the Triceratops again. He wrote, "Eats slowly." Annie nudged him harder. Jack looked at her. Annie pointed to herself. She walked her fingers through the air. She pointed to the dinosaur. She smiled. "Is she teasing?" Jack wondered. Annie waved at Jack. Jack started to grab her. She laughed and jumped away. She fell into the grass in full view of the Triceratops. "Get back!" whispered Jack. Too late. The big dinosaur had spotted Annie. He gazed down at her from the hilltop. Half of a magnolia flower was sticking out of his mouth. "Oops," said Annie. "Get back," Jack said again. "He looks nice, Jack," Annie said. "Nice? Watch out for his horns, Annie," said Jack. The Triceratops gazed calmly down at Annie. Then he turned and loped down the side of the hill. "Bye," said Annie. She turned back to Jack. "See?" Jack grunted, but he wrote in his notebook, "Nice." "Come on, let's look around some more," said Annie. As Jack started after Annie, he saw something glittering in the tall grass. Jack reached down and picked it up. It was a gold medallion. A letter was engraved on the medallion, a fancy M. "Oh, man, someone was here before us," Jack said softly. Chapter 6. Dinosaur Valley. "Annie, look at this," Jack said. "Look what I found." Annie had gone up to the hilltop. She was picking a flower from the magnolia tree. "Annie, look! A medallion!" shouted Jack. But Annie wasn't paying attention to Jack. She was staring at something on the other side of the hill. "Oh, wow," she said, clutching her magnolia flower. She took off down the hill. "Annie, come back!" Jack shouted, but Annie had disappeared. "Oh, brother," Jack muttered. He stuffed the gold medallion into his jeans pocket. Then Jack heard Annie shriek. "Annie!" he said. Jack heard another sound as well, a deep bellowing sound, like a tuba. "Jack, come here, quick!" Annie called. Jack raced up the hill. When he got to the top, he gasped. The valley below was filled with nests, big nests made out of mud. The nests were filled with tiny dinosaurs. Annie was crouching next to one of the nests. Towering over her was a gigantic duck-billed dinosaur. "Don't panic. Don't move," said Jack. He stepped slowly down the hill toward Annie. The huge dinosaur was waving her arms and making her tuba sound. Jack stopped. He didn't want to get too close. He knelt on the ground. "Okay, move toward me. Slowly," he said. Annie started to stand up. "Don't stand. Crawl," said Jack. Clutching her flower, Annie crawled toward Jack. Still bellowing, the duck-billed dinosaur followed her. Annie froze. "Keep going," Jack said. Annie started crawling again. Jack inched farther down the hill until he was just an arm's distance from Annie. He reached out and grabbed her hand. He pulled Annie toward him. "Stay down," Jack said. He crouched next to her. "Bow your head. Pretend to chew." "Chew?" said Annie. "Yes," said Jack. "I read that's what you do if a mean dog comes at you." "She's no dog, Jack," said Annie. "Just chew," said Jack. Jack and Annie both bowed their heads and pretended to chew. Soon the dinosaur grew quiet. Jack looked up. "I don't think she's mad anymore," he said. "You saved me," said Annie. "Thanks." "You have to use your brain, Annie," said Jack. "You can't just go running to a nest of babies. There's always a mother nearby." Annie stood up. "Annie, don't," said Jack. Too late. Annie held out her magnolia flower to the dinosaur. "I'm sorry I made you worry about your babies," she said. The dinosaur moved closer to Annie. She grabbed the flower from her hand. She reached for another. "No more," said Annie. The dinosaur let out a sad tuba sound. "But there are more flowers up there," Annie said. She pointed to the top of the hill. "I'll get you some." Annie hurried up the hill. The dinosaur waddled after her. Jack quickly looked at the dinosaur babies. Some were crawling out of their nests. Where are the other mothers? Jack wondered. Jack took out the dinosaur book. He flipped through the pages. He found a picture of some duck-billed dinosaurs. He read the caption. "The Antosauruses live in colonies. While a few mothers babysat the nests, others looked for food." So there were probably more mothers close by looking for food. "Hey, Jack!" Annie called. Jack looked up. Annie was at the top of the hill feeding magnolia flowers to the giant Antosaurus. "Guess what?" Annie said. "She's nice too." Suddenly the Antosaurus made her terrible tuba sound. Annie crouched down and started to chew. The dinosaur charged down the hill. She seemed afraid of something. Jack put the book on top of his pack. He hurried to Annie. "I wonder why she ran away," said Annie. "We were starting to be friends." Jack looked around. What he saw in the distance almost made him faint. An enormous monster was coming across the plain. The monster was walking on two strong legs. It was swinging a long, thick tail and dangling two tiny arms. It had a huge head, and its jaws were wide open. Even from far away, Jack could see its long, gleaming teeth. "Tyrannosaurus Rex," whispered Jack. Chapter 7. Ready, Set, Go. "Run, Annie, run!" cried Jack. "Run to the treehouse." Jack and Annie dashed down the hill together. They ran through the tall grass and ferns and past the pteranodon. They scrambled up the rope ladder and tumbled into the treehouse. Annie leaped to the window. "It's going away," she said, panting. Jack pushed his glasses into place. He looked out the window with Annie. The Tyrannosaurus was wandering off. But then the monster stopped and turned around. "Duck!" said Jack. The two of them ducked their heads. After a long moment, they peeked out the window again. "Coast clear," said Jack. "Yay," whispered Annie. "We have to get out of here," said Jack. "You made a wish before," said Annie. "Right," said Jack. He took a deep breath. "I wish we could go back to Frog Creek." Nothing happened. "I said, I wish," started Jack. "Wait," said Annie. "You were looking at a picture in the dinosaur book, remember?" "Oh, no, I left the book and my pack on the hill," said Jack. "I have to go back." Forget it, said Annie. I can't, said Jack. The book doesn't belong to us. Plus, my notebook with all my notes is in my pack, and my... Okay, said Annie. I'll hurry, said Jack. He climbed quickly down the ladder and leapt to the ground. Jack raced past the pteranodon, through the ferns, through the tall grass, and up the hill. He looked down. His pack was lying on the ground. On top of it was the dinosaur book. But now the valley below was filled with anthosauruses. They were all standing guard around the nests. Where had they been? Did fear of the Tyrannosaurus send them home? Jack took a deep breath. Ready, set, go, he thought. He charged down the hill. He ran to his backpack. He scooped it up. He grabbed the dinosaur book. Jack heard a terrible tuba sound, then another and another. All the anthosauruses were bellowing at him. Jack took off. He raced up to the hilltop. He started down the hill. He stopped. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was back. It was standing between Jack and the treehouse.